Hello, everyone. My name is Reg Calcagno. I am the Deputy National Campaign Director with the Human Rights Campaign, and I am joined here for a wonderful conversation about parents and advocacy and Tennessee. And I would like to, I'm going to have my company up here introduce themselves.
Chris Sanders, he, him, Executive Director, Tennessee Equality Project.
Karen Orslack, the Tennessee State Chapter Leader for Free Mom Hugs, she, her.
My name is Reverend Dawn Bennett. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the pastor at the table here in Nashville.
Hello, I'm Daiquiri Roan, she, her. I am on the Board of Governors with the Human Rights Campaign and also a board member with the Tennessee Equality Project.
Hi, my name is Julie Biscard. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am a district chairperson in Montgomery County for the Tennessee Equality Project.
Hello, Sarah Cunningham, she, her, founder of Free Mom Hugs.
Well, we'll try to make this as seamless or not as possible. I am so happy to be here in Nashville today. I want to give a special shout out to the folks here on the stage with me. Thank you so much to Pastor Don and to the table who have opened up their space for us. Sarah for joining us on your tour. Karen for being our lovely local host here. And for all of the folks who are here in the audience, who are both at the training and are just here for the roundtable as well. So, we are here in a state that saw 35 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced this session. Is that correct, Chris?
We were tracking 20 bills, but I don't know what you all are counting, so we'd have to compare notes, but it was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a lot. Now, these bills range from barring transgender youth and college students from sports, censoring the merest mention of LGBTQ people in school hallways and classrooms, and bills that would make it a crime to provide life-saving health care to children. It's also a state where advocates, children, students, faith leaders, businesses, parents like the parents on this stage and in this room, business owners, doctors, all came together and fought back and defeated a majority of these bills. When anti-LGBTQ legislation is introduced, it has a clear impact on our communities and on the people we love, and particularly on the children we love. Data from the Trevor Project shows that 94% of LGBTQ youth reported that recent politics negatively impacted their health. That same study found that 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. Now, I cite these statistics for the media in the room, but for many of us here, these are more than just horrifying numbers. They are lived realities. As the parents in the room, we know firsthand why these statistics exist, and that's why we're here today. You have heard your elected officials tell you that they know what's best for your child. And you've seen the hurt in your kids' eyes when they come home from a hard day at school where someone told them they were not who they were supposed to be. And you, like any parent, have felt that deep instinctual fire rise up in your core as you swore to yourself that you would do anything to protect your child. And when we talk about LGBTQ kids, it's all too often that we hear those devastating statistics. But we know that there is so much more to the story. We have seen the honor student who loves languages and dreams of being a doctor in Doctors Without Borders. We've seen the budding gymnast who turns cartwheels and does backflips into the pool. And we have seen the mini diva who is just born to be on stage. And we see each other as parents and as caregivers working hard to ensure that our children, our families enjoy the same health, happiness, and opportunities that all children deserve. And so with that said, let's get started. So, for the folks on the panel, but specifically for Chris, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about what you saw this past legislative session and maybe the past few legislative sessions in terms of what's been covered and what's happened?
Thank you, Reg, and thank all of you for being here, especially my fellow panelists who work so hard. We saw this year a record number of bills, and I think part of the ambiguity in the number is I think a lot of national organizations count the Senate and the House bills as separate bills, whereas we count them as one bill, a pair of bills, Senate and House is one. So I think that's part of that. But either way you count it, this year was a record year. Hitting issues of trans people in athletics, the curriculum at many points, the contents of public school libraries, what pronouns teachers can use and refuse to use for students, the full gamut, and healthcare. Now, as Reg noted, most of these bills did not pass, but there were a few that did. There were 2 anti-trans athlete bills that passed, and of course, in the last couple of days, there was a bill that was amended to hijack the book selection and censorship process for school libraries in the last 2 days, echoing the previous year when in the last 2 days the critical race theory bill was passed. So there were some down times when you're facing multiple bills. You're getting several bills up in committee every week. Makes it harder for the media and your community to keep track of. If a bill is deferred and then the next week it's back, the community gets confused and says, I thought they were putting that one away. Why do we have to? It's wearying to a community to be under attack, but under attack in a compressed way in a 4-month period. The great thing about these advocates is that they act. They were there on the Hill. Transgender people testified before committees a record number of times this year. There were people showing up to show support for those testifying, to be in the audience. There were people who were meeting with their legislators, having hard conversations with socially conservative elected officials, because that is what the love of their family and friends demands. So the people who are up here on stage with Reg and me are emblematic of who was in the legislature advocating for their own children and other children they know. I think it's important to point out a few patterns. Obviously, at a national level, and Reg can speak more to this, there is a concerted effort to attack trans youth and turn real people and their real lives into a wedge issue for opportunistic reasons. I say turn us into a wedge issue. Progressives sometimes try to be helpful and say, well, it's just a wedge issue. That's not helpful language. We are not a wedge issue. Our families and our friends are not a wedge issue. We have been used that way, but we are not a wedge issue. Now, I am encouraged by the fact that when I travel Tennessee, I meet parents like these in every county of the state, the most rural, suburban, urban, wherever. But the road ahead is tough. I'm going to give you an illustration of that. 41 members of the Tennessee House of Representatives face no opposition in their reelection bid, not even in the primary. 41 out of 99. There are only 30-some House seats, I can't remember the exact number, where both a Democrat and a Republican are in the general election. So it's going to be a tough road ahead, but the people who are up on stage with us are going to get us through that.
Thank you, Chris. And Chris is right. As a mother of a transgender youth, those bills are hurting every single day. And as Reg said those statistics, I did tear up. My own child was suicidal. My own child had to be hospitalized because of these laws in Tennessee. My own child had to do virtual school because in Knoxville, Tennessee, she wasn't accepted. The teachers wouldn't call her she and her, wouldn't call her by her preferred name, and wouldn't recognize her for who she was. But once she graduated and turned 18, she could get on hormones in the state of Tennessee, because before that, it was illegal. She couldn't be herself. So these laws are affecting, and they are hurting. And they're hurting in my home. They're hurting my child. And thankfully, she's 19 now, and she can make her choices, and she's been on hormones now for over a year. She was able to get facial feminization surgery, not in Tennessee. She had to go to Beverly Hills because she can't get it here. So these are affecting. And I'm a mom, just like many of you guys, who has a child who's hurting.
Thank you, Karen, and I'm sorry that you experienced that. You know, these bills are heinous. As a faith leader and a very loud faith leader in this area, not only in Tennessee but in the Deep South, I call them crimes against humanity. The reality is, as human beings, we are tripart creatures. We are mind, body, spirit creatures. And these bills are heinous in such a way that they attack the very fabric of our personhood. They attack the fabric of our children while they are outside our supervision and purview, right? They attack our parents who are doing the best that they can to raise their children. But the other thing that happens, and I have started to preach and teach about the red thread that in my best and most humble understanding, every American wants good use of their tax dollars. That is not something that we disagree on, right? Well, the reality of these bills, and bills like these, not only in Tennessee, but other states, primarily we're here to talk about Tennessee. The problem with these bills is that not only do they tear at the fabric of our children and therefore our families, families do not live in a vacuum. They too are tripart members of a community. They have jobs. They participate in the education system. They participate in the local economy. They participate in the healthcare industry, right? And so these laws, as they are tearing apart individual people and families, they are also tearing apart neighborhoods. They are tearing apart local economies. And as a faith leader, the thing that stings for me the most is that the vast majority of elected officials in this state identify as very public, faith-oriented people, particularly in the Christian tradition. And that, to me, is the most heinous thing. And what I repeat most often is, beloved, God has not said any of these things about you. People have said these things. God has not passed these laws. People have passed these laws in God's name, And that is why it is a crime against humanity, right? And so we really, really just have to vote. We have to become educated about who we put in office, because once they're elected, it's too late, and then we end up in panels like this. Love your babies. Love your babies. Love your family. And if you don't have a supportive network, reach out and find one, because we are everywhere. We might be underground in your neck of the woods, but we are everywhere.
Yes, Daiquiri, she, her. Having a network in the community is everything. I shared earlier during our training is that I came out at 18 in the early 2000s where there was not a lot of known resources to me, and so I really had to be diligent myself in research and ask questions to really find validation for myself, because being here in the Bible Belt, you hear immediately how wrong you are, and and it's so confusing, and I can only imagine what the youth go through now. Just to hear that just existing is wrong. And so community is so important, and it's so important to reach out and to rely on all of us. Like, there's power in this room, and so if you don't feel like you have anybody else, reach out and rely on us, because it's going to take us all. And speaking to us who have children, and speaking to your neighbors, your family members, and just having very intentional conversations, because that's so important. I have a non-binary teen. She goes by she, they, and she also is dealt with suicide, has been hospitalized twice within the past year, and it just breaks my heart when she comes home and she talks about the treatment and not being validated, or being called it, or question about one day she comes to school looking this way, the next day, she may feel like she wants to dress another way, and just being ridiculed for that, about that. And so we really need to tackle these laws, because living in Nashville, it's a little bit more liberal here, but when we get to these rural areas, they do not have a sense of community. So these bills really affect them, and that is really why we really need to stick together and pull together and rely on each other and show up and make noise and continue to make noise, because it's not going to stop until we get in their faces.
I'd like to speak about going to talk to my legislators. When I go in and talk to them, it's not uncommon for me to put a picture of my family in front of them and say, this is who I'm talking about. This is a real family. And when I come down here and I ask you to vote on a certain bill, I want this child to be treated just like my other two kids, and I want him to be treated just like any other child within this state. I'm a retired public school teacher, and I feel like I want to speak out for all those kids that have been rejected, not only in the schools by teachers that won't use the correct pronouns. Just this last week, I was contacted by a child that was kicked out of his home, so they're rejected by their families sometimes. If you look around your church, those empty seats, sometimes those are LGBTQ kids, so they're rejected by their churches, and now the legislative sessions are rejecting those kids. Can you imagine every day waking up and facing one more hurt? And it's no wonder those kids are suicidal. So I feel like I'm a privileged white woman in our society, but I want to stand up for those kids that don't have a voice. They can't come down to Legislative Plaza because they don't want their identities known yet. They need to hide. But these are some amazing, resilient people, and I feel like I just need to speak up for them, and I would hope that you all would speak up for them as well.
Wonderful responses here. I can't add much except for I have two children, a gay son and a straight son, and I was in my 40s before I learned that my straight son has more rights than my gay son, and my gay son has more rights than my transgender friends. And we are accountable to our children. No mother should ever have to worry about the health care, housing, whether their child would be refused service in a public space simply for who they are. I was in my 40s before I met a transgender adult that I know of. I listened to their stories, and after that particular meeting, I went in my car and I cried hot tears because I thought these are beautiful, misunderstood people. And what a difference in their lives could it have made if they had opportunities to be happy and healthy throughout their entire life. And when you have the suicide rates that we've talked about here, could you imagine thinking that the government is against you? We have moms in Texas looking for safe places to raise their children. We have, I belong to a private online Facebook group, over 40,000 moms, and we all have the same stories. As we affirm our child, we are alienated from our church homes, from our families, and from many parts of society. And let me tell you lastly, I know the power of fear and ignorance, and these bills are birthed out of fear and ignorance. And I also know the power of love and education. And that's where we find our voice, and that's where we will be victorious.
Is something that I have talked about repeatedly on within HRC, with folks like Chris, with folks like Zachary. When we hear these stories, when we hear what the lawmakers have said on the floor, when we hear what people who come to testify in support of these bills, we hear so much fear. We hear so much, and we hear so much about the statistics, and we hear so much about the suicidality. And what often gets lost is some of that joy. And what often gets lost is some of that magic, because we see our kids sort of lose some of that magic when they hear these things. Like, being a kid is hard enough. Being an adolescent is hard enough. If you ever ask someone and you're trying to like connect on empathy and you talk about, have you ever had a time and you felt different? And they're like, no, I haven't felt different at all. You ask them about middle school and suddenly everybody has a story. And what is amazing though about like the kids that we know, the kids that we've seen, like I think about kids that I have spoken to in places like Texas, in places like Oklahoma, in places like Tennessee, in places like New York, all over the country, where they could talk about being trans, but they'd really much rather talk to you about their dog. They'd really like to tell you about this really cool Lego thing that they built. They'd really like to tell you about this class that they're taking. And how amazing would it be if instead of focusing on, to Pastor Don's part about where money is spent, can you imagine instead of Tennessee having to defend lawsuits, which they wind up losing, and costing the state money, imagine if they invested that money into their schools, into their children, into our families, into being and doing what we all want. When we talk about parents' rights, you know, Julie, I would love to hear more about some of your story. You have talked about your kids. I know you said you have 3 children. And what I love most about these moments is what I think we all as parents do and are guilty of, which is like, that's really great, but let me tell you about my kid. So I want to give the parents on this stage some moments to like talk about this joy. I want you all to lift up your children, and I want you to like, if the parents on this stage could tell me like, share the thing that you love about your kids, and whoever wants to hop in, we'll get the mic to you. But who's up?
Well, we have, my husband and I, we have 2 daughters. We have obviously one that's transgender and then one is cisgender. The thing that I love most about my oldest and the one that's transgender, she is an opportunist. She will search out anything if she's interested in it. She's also neurodivergent, so autistic, and there's new research coming out about transgender and autism, so that's interesting. But she will search out anything. If she is interested, she's going to figure it out. We were talking before the panel started about her researching her facial feminization surgery. She went out and got her job at Starbucks so that Starbucks would pay for her surgery. She researched the surgeon on her own. She went to the second best surgeon in the United States to have the surgery and have it all paid for, which is pretty amazing for a 19-year-old. But if you ask her to clean her room, not going to happen. We've still been waiting on that for a while. But she's amazing. She's outgoing. She's friendly. And she's a life of a party at times. And she's just awesome. And my other daughter they're complete polar opposites. Straight-laced, rule follower, always concerned about her grades. She's first honors at school. She's made the National Honor Society when I was in Beverly Hills. So we had Dad stand in and one of our good friends stand in for me. So they're just awesome kids. They're great. But now one of the things that's new is that Christmas this year was really different. I've never had them compete so much because now I have 2 girls. So it was a lot different this year, and no one warned me. There should be like a handbook about that, because that was different. It was, well, you got this makeup. Well, I wanted this makeup. Or you got this purse. Well, I wanted this purse. So that was different. I wasn't prepared for that because we didn't have that before. So that would be a nice little handbook to have. So somebody want to create that? I'll buy it.
I am blessed with 3 children. My middle child was assigned female at birth and came out as lesbian when he was 14 in high school, right here in tiny town Tennessee, in a very conservative spot. And that was actually my entry point into community advocacy work long before I formally entered the pulpit, because I kind of dragged my feet doing that, right? Because I knew what I was signing up for, and but I still wouldn't trade it. But you know, the beautiful thing about my child, at 20 years old, he transitioned, and I was so blessed to be his surgery partner for top surgery. And he was not living at home, and so I said to him, you know what, why don't you just move in with me for a few minutes? Yeah, I'm not living with my mom. I said, I'm not asking you to move home. I'm asking you to move in during surgery and recovery, because it'd be a whole lot easier on me to run down the hall instead of run down the street. So he agreed to that. And while he was living with me, staying with me, while he was staying with me, I have to correct myself because he will correct me. While he was staying with me, we just had the opportunity to bond as adults, right? And it was such a very different experience than when he was in high school, because he was just, he was a band kid. I was a band mom, you know, and it was just a very different experience, having a lesbian daughter to having a transgender son who is a man. He's 27, right? He relies on me for nothing. But I think one of the more interesting opportunities for me now as a pastor is I was on the beach one day several years ago, and I had this vision of this tattoo, and it was the names of my children. And I was just deep in prayer, and there was a sunrise or a sunset, and I thought, you know, this is beautiful. And I came home and I tattooed it on my arm, and it became very clear to me that it forever and ever it would be a conversation piece, because I put all 4 names on my arm. And people say, oh, you have 4 children. No, I have 3. This is my son, this is my daughter, and my second child is transgender. And so, you know, I got to raise an older sister and now a younger brother, and he's just, he's happy to be an uncle, and it's a beautiful opportunity, really, to have this element in your family that not every family gets to experience. Mm-hmm. It is heartbreaking. I spend a lot of time at the psych hospital. I spend a lot of time, I have done funerals. I have done baptisms too, though. So it's a wonderful thing. And I think that, you know, Sarah, you mentioned earlier that you were in your 40s before you had met a transgender person. I have several members of the table who are older trans folks, and it's because we have created a safe space for them to be who they are in a faith place, right? And so I've got to do some affirmation of baptisms, and I think what's so ironic is that trans people are around. They've been around for so long, right? They've been around for so long, but because of laws like what we have in many states, they're forced to live in the shadows, when really we have so much to learn and so much to enjoy through their lives. And ignorance is fear, and knowledge is power.
I have two children, a 6-year-old son and a 16-year-old non-binary teen, and it's always very eventful in our house. My fiance and I, our non-binary teen, she goes by she, they. She has really taken on the role, which warms my heart. She's taken on the role of like the big sister, almost a mom. Her friends and her peer at school, she is a part of an LGBTQ group in her school, and she's one of the leaders. She volunteers with HRC Nashville all the time, and she brings her friends home, and we give them like a little care package with a T-shirt that affirms them or something, and I love it. I just love to see how much she's blossoming and how much she's stepping up and owning her own sexuality and identity. She's teaching me a lot because I thought that I was very well versed on the different identities, but she comes and throws things at me like, oh, okay. I'm like, okay. But it's just amazing to see, and she's so nurturing. She wants to be a nurse when she graduates. I'm just excited to see all that she does and how she is persevering through her mental health challenges and what she faces at school, and she's just adamant about being an advocate for this generation, and it just makes me so proud.
I am the mother of 3 adult children. They are my pride and joy. I can remember when I was younger, that's all I ever really wanted to be, was a mom and a teacher. So I had these 3 kids, and we were probably just the normal family next door. We went to church, we went to scouts, they were all on this swim team, they all got jobs. We were very close to both of our families. And I remember going to their bedrooms every night saying, God, just let them grow up to be happy. So when the youngest one reached middle school and high school, this child was not happy. And I could not figure it out because this child was raised in the same home, same environment, but something was different. And when my child finally came out as lesbian and then trans, things started to click. That is why my child wasn't happy. And I can remember praying, please don't let this be. Please change my child. Well, I got educated, and something along the way changed me, and it opened up my whole world. And I think it's been one of the biggest blessings in my life to be introduced to these LGBTQ people, and just to experience their challenges, something that I never would have known about. I'm very proud of my youngest son. He now works for an engineering company. During the pandemic, I was afraid he'd get laid off because he was just hired, but he has risen up. He's very well liked in his company. He's just gotten a raise. He's been able to fly across the United States and over to Ireland. He loves his job. He's coming into his own self. He's got a wealth of good friends. When I go to visit, I meet them all. He just bought his own home. So last week when we were traveling, I got to stay with my youngest child. And again, I don't think my life would have been as rich if I had not had this youngest child. And when I was praying that he would be changed, that was the wrong prayer, you know. It just really changed me. And I would encourage people to become educated because that is what changed me. And so when I go to meet with legislators and when I go to meet with other parents, you know, sometimes I meet with parents where they don't understand their own kids. I say, give it time. This is still the same person. And they learn that this child will grow up to be happy as long as you can love and support that child. And that makes the difference, just the love and the support that surrounds them.
I can only add that there's a before and after in my child's life, Parker. He lived with anxiety, at-risk behavior, self-harm, until he was allowed to live authentically. And he is a wonderful, talented, creative human being. He adds such a wonderful dynamic to my family that I cannot imagine our lives any other way. And in being an advocate and getting plugged in with the community, my life has been enriched. I experience my faith even more than I ever thought possible, and I see the true essence of humanity. And it's been a wonderful experience that I missed an entire adolescence of my son's life out of fear and ignorance. So at Free Mom Hugs, we really try to spare that. We pour into the community, we celebrate the community, and we encourage the families to have authentic relationships with their children. And through getting educated, we find our voice through the organization. And I want to thank the Human Rights Campaign for helping us to make our words count.
And this is, I believe this is going to be our last question. So, keeping in mind all of the bills that have been passed, both this past session as well as the year before, what does the future look like for you and your families following the passage of these anti-trans bills? And are there specific things that you are worried or concerned about? And I'm going to pass it to the parents first, but Chris, if you wanna add anything at the end, you're welcome to.
For our daughter, her number one thing, and this is awful, her number one thing is to move out of Tennessee. She said, even with her surgery, she needs to leave Tennessee because she needs to be safe. We have another area leader that's actually from Franklin, Tennessee, who does have a transgender son who actually just moved out of Tennessee to California, where the quality there is absolutely amazing. And her son moved out of Tennessee for safety and to go to college because did not feel safe here. So unfortunately, our child feels the only way to be safe is to get out of Tennessee. And I hate that, and I don't like that, but I also, for my husband and I, we totally support that because it's the truth. And for the youth now that are under the age of 18, I will continue to fight. I will continue. I'm a social worker anyway, so my job in general is to fight. So I will continue to fight. I will continue to do Free Mom Hugs, and I will show my support and be an advocate because we have to. We have to change the future because right now it's hell.
Sadly, my story with my child is the same way. He's 27. He's saving and working and saving so he can leave the state. He was raised here. I raised my entire family here. I've dumped a lot into the economy, into the education system, and it breaks my heart. But the reality is he's not safe here. I've said that multiple times to him. I've said it in interviews. I've had to accept it as his mother. So I'm going to enjoy the time that I have with him. My work, sadly, with bills like this, I have job security. And it does not make me proud to say that. It hurts my heart to say that. So I will continue to do rites of burial with the authentic names and the authentic pronouns and the authentic lived experiences. I will continue to honor families. I will continue to marry same-sex couples. I will continue to marry in any way, shape, or form. I will continue to do the work of propping people up and helping them find a way to embrace their faith as they understand it. Because God has not given up on anybody, and I'm not going to give up on anybody. And so I am hopeful for the future. I'm angry, but in the clergy world, we call it righteous anger, and that gets me a long way.
Well, my non-binary teen, she also is planning to move once she graduates. She doesn't feel comfortable about going to school here. Someone earlier mentioned about holding, not using. She doesn't want to be here, which is very sad. It's unfortunate. For myself and my fiance, we will be here. I feel such a strong sense of responsibility to stay and to fight, to show up in more communities, to diversify the HRC Nashville Steering Committee, to get into communities of color with more of the youth, even with our elderly, just to be more intentional about where we are, to make sure that everybody has community and make sure that we are providing a space and resources. So next year, when the legislative season comes, then we're ready.
My child also lives out of state in a more affirming place. I live north of Nashville in a more rural area, so it's not as affirming. And every season I say I'm not going down to Legislative Plaza because it's just too emotionally draining, and every year I'm back down here. Because I feel like I need to fight for those younger families and those younger LGBTQ people. And I know all the moms up here will know what I'm talking about, but some people may not realize is that the families of trans kids, they start building a safe folder. And that includes letters from their doctors, letters from their therapists saying that this is a good family, that their child is not being coerced or forced into being trans. Because even with my child a few years ago, we got his passport updated in the event that we might have to leave the country. We even had that thought, like, what if we have to leave? Where would we go? And the one thing is that in Tennessee, I believe we're the only state left that does not amend the birth certificate. So when a child changes their name, all they do is they cross out the name George and they type in above Susie. So like if they were to go show that, it would be very obvious that this is a transgender child. And we need to get that fixed. But it's just a shame that here in the United States of America, there are families building up safe folders. I can think of 3 families I know that have moved out of their states because it's not safe, not just here in Tennessee, but in other states. And that just should not be. I do feel hopeful, although some days I don't, but I feel hopeful because of the younger generation. There's no doubt that the younger generation gets it, and they accept each other, and I feel like we are getting better. And again, it's back to education. We need to educate and teach these people.
Excellent. She said it all. Said it all.
Well, thank you all so much. And Julie, that really was perfect. Because as much as we fight, as much as we say we don't want to do this anymore, we know that we all will be here. We know that we are hopeful. When we talked earlier today during the training, I said this is the moment of hope. This is the moment when we realize, this is the moment when other people begin to realize that this doesn't just impact transgender children who are out there. This impacts children in our lives, in our families' lives, in our friends' lives, in our neighbors' lives. And at the end of the day, all we as parents want, all we as families want, is for our children to be happy, healthy, and successful. So thank you all. Please, a round of applause for my fellow guests